The moon hung low over Blackthorn territory, pale and heavy, as if it too were waiting for something to happen. Rows of wolves stood in the training grounds, their eyes bright with excitement, their voices loud with laughter and gossip. Tonight was the proving, the night every young wolf in the pack stepped forward to show their true form for the first time in front of the entire community. It was a night of pride for most families. For Lyra Voss, it was a night of dread. She stood at the very back of the crowd, her arms wrapped around herself, trying to disappear into the shadows. She had learned long ago that shadows were safer than attention. 10 years had passed since the night her parents were killed, the night a rival pack attacked their home, and left her the only survivor. She had been 7 years old. She had not spoken a single word since. The pack called her the Silent Omega. Some said it with pity, most said it with scorn. Omegas were already the lowest rank among wolves, expected to serve, to clean, to stay quiet and useful. But Lyra's silence made her an easy target for cruelty, because she could not defend herself with words, and no one expected her to defend herself with anything else either. At the front of the grounds, seated on a raised stone chair, was Alpha King Cale Ashgrove. He was young for a king, only 26, but he had ruled Blackthorn since his father's death 3 years ago, and he ruled it with an iron will. His broad shoulders and sharp jaw made him look every bit the warrior his reputation claimed him to be. He was respected, feared, and admired in equal measure. He was also, Lyra knew from years of experience, unkind to those he considered beneath him. One by one, the young wolves stepped into the circle and shifted. Some became sleek gray wolves, some tawny brown. One boy surprised everyone with a coat as black as coal that made the crowd cheer. Cale nodded at each display, sometimes offering a rare word of approval, sometimes simply moving on to the next name on the list. Then a voice called out from near the front, one of Cale's closest warriors, a broad man named Draven who enjoyed mocking the weak almost as much as he enjoyed fighting. "What about the mute girl?" Draven said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Has anyone ever actually seen the Omega shift? Maybe she doesn't have a wolf at all." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Lyra felt her face grow hot, her chest tighten. She kept her eyes on the ground, hoping the moment would pass, hoping no one would look at her too closely. But Cale's eyes had already found her. "Bring her forward," he said, and though his tone was calm, there was an edge to it, the edge of a man who enjoyed being entertained at someone else's expense. 2 warriors stepped toward Lyra before she could protest, taking her gently but firmly by the arms and guiding her into the circle. The crowd's laughter grew louder. Someone whistled. Someone else called out a cruel joke about Omegas and their supposed weakness. Lyra stood in the center of the grounds, alone, feeling every pair of eyes on her like needles against her skin. Cale rose from his stone chair and walked toward her, slow and deliberate, the way a predator walks, when it already knows it has won. He stopped a few feet away and looked her over, from her downturned eyes to her trembling hands. "Well, Omega," he said, "show us your wolf. Or is Draven right? Is there nothing inside you at all?" Lyra's throat ached. She wanted to speak, wanted to tell him that her silence was not emptiness, that behind her quiet eyes, there was a whole ocean of grief and anger she had never been allowed to release. But the words would not come. They never came, not since that night. So she said nothing, and her silence only made the crowd laugh harder. "Nothing," Cale said, shaking his head, almost disappointed, as if he had expected her to at least try. "Take her back to the kitchens where she belongs." Something inside Lyra cracked. It was not anger exactly, not at first. It was the weight of 10 years pressing down all at once. 10 years of being invisible, of being mocked, of swallowing every insult because she had no voice to answer with. She thought of her mother's laugh, gone forever. She thought of her father's hands, warm and steady, gone forever. She thought of every night she had cried, without making a sound, because even her tears had learned to stay quiet. And for the first time since she was 7 years old, she stopped holding back. She closed her eyes. The crowd's laughter faded into a strange silence as they noticed the change in her posture. Her shoulders, always hunched and small, straightened. Her hands, always trembling, went still. A cold wind swept through the grounds, though the night had been warm only a moment before. Frost began to creep along the grass beneath her bare feet, spreading outward in delicate white patterns. Kale's smile faltered. What? The shift came not with the awkward, gradual transformation the young wolves had shown earlier, but in a single breathless instant, as if the wolf inside her had simply been waiting, patient and enormous, for permission to exist. Where Lyra had stood, there was now a wolf unlike anything Blackthorn had ever seen. Her fur was the color of moonlight on snow, silver white and faintly glowing, and her eyes held the same pale light, ancient and calm. She was larger than any wolf in the circle, larger than Kale's own war form, her presence pressing down on the crowd like a physical weight. No one laughed anymore. Draven, who had started this cruel game, took an involuntary step backward, his bravado gone. Around the circle, warriors who had spent their lives training for battle found their legs suddenly unwilling to hold them steady. One by one, without meaning to, without understanding why, they began to kneel. It was not a conscious choice. It was instinct, the same instinct that told a smaller wolf to submit to a larger one, except this instinct was screaming at every wolf present that they were standing before something far above them in the ancient order of things. Even Kale, who had never bowed to anyone in his life, felt his own alpha aura falter and bend beneath hers, like a candle flame struggling against a rising wind. He stumbled back a step, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. He had heard stories, old stories his grandmother used to tell, about a bloodline of wolves called the Lunar Sovereigns, wolves said to carry the blessing of the moon itself, wolves thought to have vanished from the world generations ago. He had always believed them to be legend, nothing more than bedtime tales meant to frighten pups into obedience. Now one stood before him, silver and silent, and she had been living in his kitchens for 10 years. The great wolf did not attack. She did not need to. She simply stood in the center of the frost-covered grounds, her glowing eyes moving slowly across the crowd, across every face that had ever laughed at her, every mouth that had ever called her weak. She let them see her, fully and completely, for the first time. The silence stretched on, heavy and complete, broken only by the soft sound of wind moving through her fur. Kale forced himself to stand straight again, though his legs still felt unsteady. He was a king. He could not kneel, not truly, not in front of his own pack. But he could not deny what his instincts were telling him either. He took a slow breath and, for the first time that night, spoke without mockery in his voice. "Lyra," he said quietly, and it was strange to hear her actual name spoken aloud in that circle, as if most of them had forgotten she had one. "I am sorry." The wolf's ears turned toward him, but she did not move otherwise. Her pale eyes studied him, and he found he could not read what was behind them, though he searched for anger, for triumph, for anything he could understand. Instead, there was only a deep and patient stillness, the stillness of someone who had waited a very long time to be seen. Slowly, the frost around her began to melt, and her great silver form folded inward, shrinking, shifting, until Lyra knelt on the grass in her human shape again, breathing hard, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. She looked exhausted, drained in a way that went beyond the physical effort of the shift, as if releasing that part of herself had also released years of buried pain all at once. For a moment, no one moved. Then Kale did something none of them expected. He crossed the distance between them and knelt down in front of her, lowering himself to her level, ignoring the murmurs that spread through the crowd behind him. He offered her his hand. "I have been unkind to you," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear it clearly. "I judged you because you were quiet, and I mistook your silence for weakness. I was wrong. I think I have been wrong about a great many things concerning you, and I intend to correct that, starting tonight." Lyra looked at his offered hand for a long moment. Trust did not come easily to her, not after everything, not after years of being overlooked and mocked by the very people who now stared at her with wide, frightened eyes. But something in Kale's expression had changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like humility, an emotion she had never once seen on his face before. She placed her hand in his. He helped her to her feet gently, as though she were something precious rather than something disposable, and turned to face the crowd, still holding her hand steady in his own. From this night forward, Kale announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent grounds, Lyra Voss will not be treated as an Omega. She carries the blood of the lunar sovereigns. A line thought lost to us, and she has more strength and more dignity than any wolf standing here tonight, myself included. Anyone who has mocked her, myself first among them, owes her an apology and a debt of respect that will take a long time to repay. Draven, still pale, dropped his eyes to the ground and said nothing, which was, for once, exactly the right response. Lyra did not speak. She still could not. But as she looked out at the crowd that had spent years laughing at her, she felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been closed tightly for 10 years, beginning, just slightly, to open. She was not healed. She knew healing would take more than a single night, more than a single proving, more than the sudden respect of people who had ignored her for so long. But for the first time since she lost her parents, she did not feel invisible. She felt seen. Kale walked beside her as the crowd slowly began to disperse, still murmuring, still glancing back at her with expressions caught somewhere between awe and shame. He did not fill the silence with more words, seeming to understand instinctively that she did not need noise from him, only presence. It was the smallest kindness, but after years of cruelty, it felt enormous. As they reached the edge of the grounds, Lyra paused and looked up at the moon, still pale and full above them. It had watched over her the night she lost everything, and it had watched over her tonight, the night she finally let the world see what she had been hiding all along. She did not need words to know that everything was about to change. And beside her, the Alpha King who had once mocked her, stood quietly, waiting, patient for the first time in his life, ready to learn what true strength actually looked like.